Hey everyone, Danny here. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is episode number 339. Thank you for joining me as we continue in our study in the book of Matthew. In this episode, we are picking back up in chapter 17, and we'll just jump right in. It says, "And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he," speaking of Jesus, "was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, 'Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.' He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him.' When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, 'Rise and have no fear.' And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only." And as I read this, I notice one bit here, and it's kind of perplexing to me when I think about it in the moment. Jesus comes, touches them, says, "Rise and have no fear." You would think, I would think, that this fear they feel is reasonable. It's fair. It's even, I would venture to say, right. I mean, we have God himself speaking, the Father speaking over the Son, and just the awe and mightiness and the weightiness of the moment. And of course, Peter, just beside himself, doesn't know what to say. And rather than just be still and be quiet, he has to do something, say something, offer something. It's almost laughable when we think about his comment. It's good that we're here. Like, good thing you have us here, because we can make these shelters, these places of remembrance. But it would seem to me that this is a good and right place for these men, Peter, James, and John, to feel a righteous fear. But what I think is right isn't always right, and I see here in the text, Jesus tells them to have no fear, to not be afraid. And we see him use this language many times. And I think there are, real clear places where that would be, sound advice. Do not be afraid in the situation in which you could be fearful, because of the circumstances, because of the persecution, because of nature. Because of whatever obstacle stands in your way, don't be afraid of it. But here, it's the weightiness of God, his presence, and his just there-ness. But Jesus tells them not to be afraid. And I don't really have an explanation for it, though it is not what I would have imagined. I would have thought that having a holy fear in this is good and right, and I won't go so broad as to say that that's not what Jesus is saying. Perhaps it is good to. I think it's healthy for each of us to have a fresh, just awareness of the magnitude of God. Having a healthy awareness of who we are speaking to. I think this is a good thing. So I say that to say, as I sit here and read this, I find myself fairly puzzled and scratching my head over this statement of Jesus to not be afraid. We know through Scripture that the Father is our Father, if we indeed belong to Him. So I find this bit a bit perplexing. Verse 9, and as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. Now, I'm going to backpedal here for just a second because this actually has something to do with a bit of writing that I have done just recently, maybe actually even today. So we notice here in this transfiguration moment, they had went up a mountain. They had seen they beheld the glory of Jesus. They saw him in a way that they had not seen him before. And his majesty really shined bright, so much so that they didn't even hardly have a context for it. But they climbed the mountain. They ascended up a mountain. This moment happens, and verse 9 tells us that they were coming down the mountain. Well, to come down a mountain, you have to go up a mountain. And I think this language is, I feel like it's very insightful because I think in our Christian journey, there is this path that we take as we rise up, as we ascend, as we climb this, if you will, path to God, this pathway that, and I would say that these disciples, if you will, we're not really in this point talking about salvation. Let's imagine, and I think that it would be fair to assume that this salvation is secured. That has already happened in these men's lives. But I think there is a process of our journey in the Christian faith that we ascend. We become more and more like God because we behold Him. We fix our gaze upon Him. And there is a process of ascending. I'm struggling with language And I don't want it to sound, too ethereal. But notice that these disciples, they ascended, they climbed up a mountain, they had an experience with Jesus. Their vision, their perception of him was altered, was changed. It was, we would say, I would say, it was, there was a veil that was removed, and they beheld the glory of Jesus Christ. And so as they came down the mountain, I think this is really a witness to, I think, what happens or what occurs in each of our lives. We climb this mountain to God. We experience him. We see him in a new way. And then it is from that place that we come down and we interact with the world around us. I think Moses, this happened to him in a similar fashion. He ascends the mountain. He interacts. He engages with God himself. And then he comes back down with this shiningness, this residue from being in the presence of God and being engaged with him, and that carried over to those around him, so much so that Moses had to veil himself because he shined so brightly. And so I think this occurrence here that we read in Matthew 17, I think it bears a parallel in our lives, that we must seek to behold the Lord. And I would say it can be a struggle, and it can be a very difficult climb. Sometimes you don't feel like climbing. Sometimes you just feel like resting, and sometimes there are so many distractions along the way, along the path to ascension. But we must constantly remind ourselves that it is God at that peak, and he is the prize. And more than what we gain from him, more so, it is the opportunity to behold him. So I think there is some real meat, some weight in this parallel that each of us really should apply to our lives and remind ourselves on a daily basis that he is worth climbing that hill of those obstacles that we face day to day. I think the more frequently we ascend, the healthier that we find ourselves on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes we spend too much time at the bottom of the hill, and we find ourselves depleted and struggling and facing some of those, recurring demons. And so I would just encourage each of us, myself included, to really persist in that place of ascension, of climbing the hill of God, to encounter God, to be where he is. Jesus said, or perhaps it was elsewhere written, but speaking of God, if you seek me, you'll find me. And so we can have confidence that when we seek him, as we try to ascend, we will find him. And I hope that in this you don't hear that, God is far off and we must ascend to experience God. That's not the case. God is all places, even at our lowest low, no ascension required. But generally speaking, there is a facet of encountering God by way of the climb through and past those obstacles to where we rise above the circumstance to lay hold of nearness and the presence of God. Okay. Verse 14. And when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him, and kneeling before him said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic, and he suffers terribly. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. And Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. I don't have something to unpack here, but this is just in a moment observation. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. I don't know if that seems peculiar to you when you think about the hymns. Jesus rebuked him, who him, and the demon came out of him, who the boy, and the boy was healed instantly. So spend some time thinking about that. Jesus rebuked him, the demon came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Who are the hymns, and why are the hymns different than the boy was healed? I think that will yield an interesting conclusion, revelation, and so I would encourage you to chew on that. I don't have something in the moment, but it's an observation that I think there is something there below the surface, just kind of shining through. I would encourage you to take a look at that. Verse 19, Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? What a great question that is. I'm sure some of you listening have faced situations where you felt utterly and completely helpless. I know I have. And in fact, when you try to take action that you believe to be important and necessary and even biblical, when you take that action, it doesn't happen the way you think it does, or should, or would. And so their question, just like each of our questions on a daily basis, is why could we not do this? What went wrong? Did we do something wrong? Help us to understand. Verse 20, Jesus said to them, Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. I find this verse both encouraging and, if I'm honest, a bit discouraging. I find it encouraging because, Jesus says clearly and explicitly that if you have faith, even the smallest of faith, grain of a mustard seed is tiny, very tiny. If you have faith even that size, you can say to something as difficult as moving a mountain, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Many times we view this passage and we say, it's a metaphor, it's symbolic, and very well could be very symbolic, speaking of a mountain metaphorically. But then Jesus puts at the very end of it, nothing will be impossible. So if we wanted to tag that with this, well, it's just symbolic, it's a metaphor, okay. But then Jesus adds in there, nothing will be impossible. So I take that for what it says. Nothing will be impossible for you. We all face things that seem absolutely and completely impossible. I'm facing several things that feel impossible right now. And I'm sure you are as well. We all have these impossible mountains that we are facing. But Jesus says, even a little bit of faith, nothing will be impossible. So I mentioned I find this verse to be slightly discouraging too. And the reason for that is really kind of in the same kind of justification. Jesus says it only takes a little bit of faith. Nothing will be impossible. And so that same realization, it makes me then question, well, when I take action because I believe the Lord is leading me away, a certain way, and it doesn't happen, I immediately go back to this place and think, is it because of my little faith? Because nothing will be impossible to those with even just a little bit of faith. So sometimes I find myself discouraged because, if I'm just being real, because when success doesn't come, my reaction to that is that my faith isn't strong enough. My faith is even smaller than a grain of mustard seed. And I think just to kind of come full circle in that question, as everyone asks that question, we all come back to that question of, is our faith sufficient? I think many times things don't happen the way that we're believing for because God has different plans. He has ways that are higher than ours, and his timing is oftentimes, and seems like very often, is different than ours. So just because success doesn't come doesn't mean that it's because your faith is too small. You may have very great faith. You may have marvelous faith. I think about the centurion, that Jesus was marveled at his faith. He said, "Just say the word. You don't even have to come. You can heal." Was it a servant? You don't even have to come. And Jesus marveled at his faith. And so you may have faith that is marvelous, but you still don't see success. Well, don't fall into that trap of thinking that's because my faith is too small. You end up really kind of deteriorating yourself. I do the same thing. We should first ask God, just like these disciples did, why did it not work out like we thought? And let him tell you. But a lot of times, it's because his plan is different. His approach may be different. He's trying to accomplish something different. Or the time is just not correct. So there's many things to learn. we'll move on. Verse 22. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were greatly distressed. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the half-shekel tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" He said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others?" And when he said, "From others," Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea, cast a hook, take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself." This scene in itself has a lifetime of revelation and truth and encouragement in it. Jesus says, however, not to give offense to them. Sometimes your rights, your ability to do a certain thing comes second tier to not offending someone else. We must be very cautious of just gallivanting our freedom in Christ, because here we see Jesus was very careful not to offend. And so I think it would warrant us to really take a step back and assess, what is it that God wants in this moment? We may be free, completely free to be a certain way. But I think, Paul wrote in one of his epistles, one of his letters, that to not use your freedom at the expense of being a stumbling block to one of your fellow brethren. This is an important realization. And lastly, just as we wrap this up, think about all the things that had to align for this. We have the tax collectors of this half shekel tax. I think it's a temple tax. Peter is asked this question, does your teacher not pay it? And Peter says, yes, he does. So we've got this moment happening. Jesus, knowing what happened, just goes right to him and speaks to him and poses this question. And then Jesus tells him, out of all the moments and all the occurrences, go to the sea, cast a hook, take the first fish that comes up, and open its mouth, and you will find a shekel. Somebody lost that shekel. Somebody tossed it into the sea. Somebody made a wish and flipped it in there at some point in some time. And of all the fish in the sea, that fish got a hold of it and kept it, stored it in its mouth. It didn't pass down into into its belly. It stayed there to be accessible. So think about all of those things that had to line up just right. Peter standing in the right spot. It's multiple miracles happening in this one moment. And so each of us are facing circumstances that seem like, a miracle it will be a miracle if this works out. And so I would just encourage you to remind you that God is a miracle worker. All of the complexity of things, of stories and characters having to align in our stories a certain way, in a certain order, a certain sequence, the right time. God is a master architect of aligning all of the components in our story to come out just like it needs to. So I would say be encouraged. Whatever you're facing and going through, whatever struggle and obstacle, be encouraged, because God can cause the right fish to come along, to scoop up, to take up in its mouth just the right amount to provide for your situation. And in the process of that, we're considering others above ourselves, maintaining humility, and in all of that, giving God glory and praise for it. So that will end Matthew 17. Thank you so much for being with me. Thank you as you are following along with this podcast and these different studies. I hope they really minister to you in a deep way. Please share them with people, various platforms, social media, so we can get these across to as many people as possible. If you have questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. You can email the Bible Study Podcasts at gmail.com. So thank you so much for being with me, and I look forward to the next episode. God bless.